Number 5. Evelyn Hartley. 15-year-old Evelyn Hartley of La Crosse, Wisconsin, was the daughter of a professor, and she was a straight-A student who was heavily involved in school activities. On the night of October 24th, 1953, Evelyn was babysitting a 20-month-old baby for another professor named Viggo Rasmussen. The professor had a regular babysitter, but on that night it was the college's homecoming game, and the babysitter wanted to see the game, so Evelyn was only filling in for her. Evelyn was supposed to call her father at 8:30 to check in, but she didn't. He started calling the Rasmussen home, and no one answered. So he got in his car and drove over to their house. He knocked on the door, and no one answered, so he tried to open the door, but it was locked. He looked through the living room window and saw Evelyn's school books on the floor, along with one of her shoes and her glasses, which were broken. Her father looked around the house, and all the windows were locked. All of them, except for one in the basement, and that window was open. Her father climbed through the window and dropped into the unfinished basement, and there he found Evelyn's other shoe and some blood. He went upstairs and found the radio still on. Evelyn's books were scattered on the floor, and he found some more blood. He checked into the baby's room, and thankfully, he was fine, but Evelyn was nowhere to be found. The police were called, and they arrived 5 minutes later. What they concluded is that the kidnapper may have been casing the neighborhood. There were pry marks on another set of windows on another house not too far away. Some neighbors heard a scream around 7 o'clock, but they thought it was just children playing. The scream most likely came from Evelyn, meaning that she was kidnapped shortly after the professor, his wife, and his oldest son left for the game. The kidnapper possibly saw them leave, and he would have been able to see Evelyn sitting in the living room through the open curtains. He tried to pry open 2 different windows before finding the basement window unlocked. He opened the window and dropped into the basement. He climbed the stairs and found Evelyn alone in the living room doing her homework. She let out a scream and he attacked her. He dragged Evelyn into the basement where he assaulted her in some unknown way. The injury caused her to bleed more profusely than she had been upstairs, and it most likely incapacitated her. He then pushed her body through the window, carried her to his car, and drove off. Over the next several days, bloody clothes, possibly belonging to Evelyn and her kidnapper, were found in the area, but Evelyn herself has never been found. There have been several suspects in the case, but many people think that Ed Gein is responsible for the kidnapping. Gein lived about 100 miles away from La Crosse in Plainfield, Wisconsin, but supposedly on the night of the kidnapping, he was in La Crosse visiting relatives. When Gein's property was searched, no trace of Evelyn could be found. And if there was one thing that Ed Gein liked to do, it was keep traces of his victims in plain sight. Gein denied being involved in the kidnapping, and he died in July 1984. Sadly, the whereabouts of Evelyn's remains and who kidnapped her is still a mystery, and the case is colder than a winter's night in Wisconsin. Number 4. Melissa Highsmith. In 1971, 22-year-old Alta Highsmith left her husband, and she moved with her 21-month-old daughter, Melissa, to Fort Worth, Texas. She got a job as a waitress, but she needed a babysitter to look after Melissa, so she placed an ad in the newspaper. Not long after the ad was published, a woman who said her name was Ruth Johnson called about the babysitting job. She said she had a big house with a big yard, and she took care of other children. Alta thought it sounded pretty promising, so she told Johnson to meet her at the restaurant where she worked. But Johnson didn't show up for the meeting. After standing up Alta, Johnson called her again. Johnson apologized and convinced Alta that she really wanted the job, so Alta hired her. They made arrangements for Johnson to pick up Melissa on August 23rd at 7:30 a.m. at Alta's apartment. On that morning, Alta went to work, and she left Melissa in the care of her roommate. At 7:30 a.m., Ruth Johnson arrived at the apartment, and the roommate handed over the baby with a change of clothes and some diapers. At 8 o'clock that night, Alta called the police because Johnson hadn't returned Melissa. Unfortunately, Alta never saw Melissa ever again. The police interviewed the roommate, and she said that Ruth Johnson, which probably wasn't her real name, was well dressed and she wore white gloves. The roommate also suggested that it was possible that Ruth Johnson was actually a man dressed like a woman, but she wasn't sure. The first suspect was Melissa's father, but he was living in Illinois at the time of the kidnapping. After Melissa was kidnapped, he and Alta got back together, and they had 3 more children before they split up again in 1998. The police think it's possible that Melissa was kidnapped by a woman who wanted to raise Melissa as her own daughter. If that is the case, then it is possible that Melissa Highsmith is still alive. If Melissa Highsmith is still alive, she'd be 48 years old. On the screen now is an age-progressed photo of what she might have looked like at the age of 42. Her family is optimistic that she is still alive, and hopefully, one day, she'll come home. Number 3. Jaidyn Leskie. Around 2 o'clock on the afternoon of June 14, 1997, Belinda Williams dropped off her 14-month-old son, Jaidyn Leskie, at the home of her boyfriends, Greg Domasevich, in the small town of Newborough, Victoria, Australia. Domasevich had babysat for her several times before, and when Jaidyn was over at his house, he usually just played with the dogs. As it started to get dark, the boy's mother called Domasevich for a ride home. The phone rang over 15 times, but there was no answer. Williams decided to carry on drinking, so she went to a party, then a bar. Sometime after 2 a.m., Domasevich went to pick up Williams, who was drunk. On the drive home, Domasevich told Williams that Jaidyn wasn't at the house. Instead, he was in the hospital because he had been burned. Williams wanted to be taken to the hospital right away, but Domasevich told her that she was too drunk to go. Instead, he drove back to his house, and once they arrived there, they made a startling discovery. The windows on the house had been smashed, and there was a severed pig's head on the lawn. After seeing the vandalism, Williams told Domasevich to call the police, but he refused to. Williams didn't want to stay at his house, so he drove her home, and then he returned to his house. A short time after he dropped her off, Williams called Domasevich and asked him to come over, and he agreed. On the way over to her house, Domasevich was pulled over by a police officer, and he didn't say anything was wrong. When he got to Williams' house, he woke her up and told her that he had lied. He said that Jaidyn wasn't in the hospital, he was missing, and they needed to go to the police. A massive search was launched, but Jaidyn was nowhere to be found. What they did find was some tissues in Domasevich's house that had Jaidyn's blood on it. Domasevich said that Jaidyn had cut himself while playing with the dogs. Another thing that the police noticed was that Domasevich's wallet and his jacket were both wet. The police learned that the pig's head was thrown at the house by the brother and a friend of a former girlfriend of Domasevich, a young woman named Yvonne Penfold. She didn't participate in the vandalism, but she was there when it happened, and she watched it. Apparently, when Domasevich and Penfold broke up, Penfold had Domasevich's pet pig slaughtered and returned to him as cuts of bacon and pork chops. However, Penfold swore that she didn't take the child. She said that when they pulled up near Domasevich's house, they saw him put a bag into his car, and then he sped off. A month after Jaidyn went missing, Domasevich was arrested and charged with his murder, even though Jaidyn's body had not been found. Sadly, New Year's Day 1998 brought bad news for Belinda Williams. Jaidyn's body had been found about 20 miles away from where he went missing, floating in the Tangio River along with a sleeping bag. The medical examiner said that Jaidyn most likely died from head injuries, and his left arm was broken in 2 places. The police think that Domasevich grabbed Jaidyn's arm and broke it. When he realized he hurt Jaidyn, he either decided to kill him and hide his body to cover up what he did, or he simply snapped and threw Jaidyn against the wall. He put Jaidyn's body in a sleeping bag, and to make sure the body sank, he waded out into the water, which would explain why his wallet and his jacket were wet. Domasevich went to trial in October 1998, and his lawyers pointed out that the medical examiner couldn't determine with certainty how Jaidyn sustained his injuries. They also said it was ridiculous to suggest that he would do something as drastic as kill the boy just to hide an injury. Finally, they said that the police developed tunnel vision for Domasevich, and the police should have put more resources into investigating Penfold and the Pighead team, as they came to be known. After all, what are the odds that they would vandalize the house on the same night that Jaidyn happened to disappear? The trial lasted for 2 months, and the result was that Domasevich was acquitted of both murder and manslaughter. In 2005, an inquest found that Domasevich was guilty of not taking care of the toddler, and it said that he most likely disposed of the body. Domasevich's lawyer blasted the inquest, saying that he had already been acquitted of killing the boy. Jaidyn's mother, Belinda Williams, supported Domasevich's claims of innocence for years, but now she believes he is responsible for her son's death. She is hoping that one day, justice will be served. Number 2. The Girls from Pocatello. On June 14, 1981, 14-year-old Linda Smith was at her home in Pocatello, Idaho, babysitting her 9-year-old brother Ben, while her mother was out at a bar with some friends. Early on the morning of June 15th, Ben was asleep on a recliner in his living room, and he was woken up by the sound of his sister screaming. Suddenly, a man came into the living room carrying Linda with his hand over her mouth. He rushed through the living room and out of the house. 9-year-old Ben tried to stop the man, and the man pushed him to the ground and told him to stay away or he'd get hurt. The man threw Linda into the back of his black van that had painted flames on it, then he got into the driver's seat and drove away. After being pushed down by the kidnapper, Ben ran to his neighbor's house to get help. The police arrived a short time later, but they didn't believe Ben's story. They thought that Linda ran away and Ben made up the story to cover for her. A week after she disappeared, her clothes were found discarded on the side of the road. Then, 11 months later, her skeletal remains were found in a ravine. Due to the level of decomposition, it was impossible to tell how she died. Ben described the man as being in his 20s or his 30s, and he had dark blonde hair with a mustache and a beard. He said that the man smelled like alcohol and sweat. Apparently, the year before Linda was kidnapped, the family received a threatening letter from a man that they helped put in prison. In 1991, Ben picked the man who wrote the letter out of a photo lineup and said he was the kidnapper, but the man was never charged and the police eventually lost the letter. On June 4, 1983, nearly 2 years after Linda was kidnapped from her home, 14-year-old Cindy Bringhurst was babysitting a 2-year-old girl in Pocatello. The mother of the child was working at a bar. At 11:45, she called Cindy because her purse and her keys were missing, and she wanted to check in to make sure that everything was okay. Cindy sounded fine and said nothing was wrong. 2 hours later, the mother made her way home and found the door to the apartment unlocked. The television was on and nothing had been disturbed, but Cindy was gone. The mother checked on the toddler, and she was asleep in the bedroom. She called Cindy's parents, but she wasn't at home either. Her body was found over 75 miles away in a wooded area called Mine Creek about a month after she went missing. She had been strangled to death. The police think that the stolen purse and keys are linked to the murder because they think it's too much of a coincidence that both would happen on the same night. They did have a suspect who they thought stole the purse, so they searched his vehicle and his home, but the purse has never been found, so the man was never charged. The police speculate that the killer possibly knew the mother personally, or at least knew that she had a babysitter at her apartment. He may have also known Cindy because there were no signs of a struggle in the apartment. There's even some speculation that she left the apartment of her own free will. It's unclear if the two kidnappings are connected, but they do share an interesting commonality. On the night that Linda was kidnapped, her mother was out at a bar, which wasn't identified in the news reports, and her brother remembered that the kidnapper smelled like alcohol. As for Cindy, the kidnapper possibly got access to her because he stole the mother's purse and keys from the bar where the mother was working. What makes these cases even more disturbing is that Linda and Cindy were the third and fourth young girls to be murdered between 1978 and 1983 in Pocatello, which was a city that had a population between 40 and 45,000 people. On July 22, 1978, 15-year-old Patricia Campbell, along with her two sisters, were dropped off near the city's courthouse to watch the Pioneer Day Parade. After the parade, they went to a local park to play, and it was there that they met up with 12-year-old Tina Anderson. They played on the swings for a while, and Tina broke away from the sisters to go to a babysitting job. When she arrived at the home where she was supposed to babysit, the family told her that they weren't ready for her yet, so Tina left, but never returned. A short time after Tina left the sisters, Patricia Campbell's sister saw Patricia talking to a man wearing a blue hooded sweatshirt, and he had a large ring. His face was obscured because of the hood on his sweatshirt, so the sister couldn't see his face well. But she remembered the sweatshirt because she thought it was weird that he was wearing one because it was so hot. Later that evening, when neither Tina nor Patricia returned home, their parents called the police. 3 years would go by before their skeletal remains were found in a wooded area about 60 miles away from where they went missing. Tina's remains were identified right away, while Patricia's wouldn't be identified until 2007. It was unclear how Patricia died, but Tina had been shot once in the head with a small caliber gun. And the case only gets stranger from there. Not far from their bodies, the police found the skull of a third woman. She was about 15 to 20 years old, and she was African American. She has never been identified, and the police do not think she is from the area where her body was found because she didn't match any missing persons reports from southeast Idaho. In March 2016, the Oneida County Sheriff's Office posted on Facebook that the murders of Patricia Campbell and Tina Anderson had been solved. They said that they are confident that they know who the killer is, but they did not name any suspects in the posting. They admitted that a lot of evidence had been lost over time, but they had some strong circumstantial evidence and interviews, so they think they know what happened. They did not mention any updates on the unidentified skull of the African American girl or the murders of Linda or Cindy. Finally, they said that they did not plan on charging anyone with the murders. When the local newspaper called for a follow-up, the sheriff's office refused to respond, and they have not released any other information about the case since the Facebook posting. Even though the sheriff's office is staying quiet in regards to the cases being connected, it should be pointed out that there are some similarities that tie all 4 known victims together. All 4 were about the same age, all of them were kidnapped in June or July, and their bodies were all discarded in wooded areas. Finally, they all went to the same school, Almeda Junior High School. Whether the 4 girls were killed by the same person, or if it was just a string of bad luck for the high school, may never be answered. Number 1. Karmein Chan. On April 13, 1991, 13-year-old Karmein Chan was babysitting her 2 younger sisters at her family's home in Templestown, Victoria, Australia. Their parents were at work at their Chinese food restaurant, which was about 10 minutes away, and the girls were watching a documentary about Marilyn Monroe in one of the bedrooms. At around 9 p.m., Karmein and one of her sisters decided to go to the kitchen. When they went into the hallway, they found a man wearing a balaclava, armed with a large carving knife. He grabbed the sisters by the hair and led them back to the bedroom. Once he was inside the bedroom, he got the 2 youngest sisters into a cupboard and then barricaded them in using the bed. They were able to free themselves a few minutes later, and when they got out, they found Karmein missing. The police were called, and they concluded that the man cut a window screen to get into the house. The police also discovered that the family's Camry had been spray painted. On the hood and on the windshield it said "Payback, Asian drug dealer," and then on the driver's side it said "More and more to come." What they didn't find was any traces of Karmein. Her body was found nearly a year later on April 9, 1992, about 10 miles from her home in a landfill. She had been shot 3 times in the back of the head. The police concluded that the killer had scoped out the family's home before the kidnapping. He knew that there were children in the home, even though there were no outward signs that children lived there, like bikes or toys laying outside. He spray painted the car to make the kidnapping look like it was drug related, but the police are confident that they know who is responsible for Karmein's murder. It is a serial home invader and pedophile, nicknamed Mr. Cruel. The first known Mr. Cruel attack happened on August 22, 1987 in Lower Plenty, Victoria. A man armed with a gun and a knife broke into a house by removing a window pane. Once inside the house, he got the parents to lie on their stomach, and then he tied up their hands behind their backs. He then tied their 7-year-old son to his bed. Finally, he turned his attention to their 10-year-old daughter. After he was finished, he cut the phone line and left the house. Luckily, no one was killed in the home invasion. Mr. Cruel struck again 16 months later in Ringwood, Victoria. On December 27, 1988, a masked man armed with a knife and a gun broke into another family's home. He tied up the parents, cut the phone lines, and then demanded some money. He then grabbed the couple's 10-year-old daughter, put tape over her eyes, and then fled the house with her. Thankfully, she was released 18 hours later near a high school. Mr. Cruel then went quiet for another 18 months. Then on July 3, 1990, Mr. Cruel broke into a third home. After he cut the phone lines, he tied up the family and he kidnapped the 13-year-old girl who lived there. He put tape over her eyes and transported her to another house. She was held for 50 hours before she was released. Finally, 9 months later, Karmein was kidnapped and killed. After Karmein's murder, the attacks came to an end. The police think that he may have stopped because they unwittingly interviewed him and he got scared, thinking that the police were getting too close. But they weren't getting close to arresting anyone, and to date, the police don't know the identity of Mr. Cruel. The investigation to unmask Mr. Cruel was one of the biggest criminal investigations in Australia's history. The FBI was called in, and they developed a profile of Mr. Cruel. They believe he may come across as a nice, normal guy. He is probably a good neighbor and is polite, but he's also introverted. They think that he worked at a school and treated children nicely. He may have also lived near an airport because one victim remembered hearing airplanes while she was being held captive. He may have also lived near his first victim. Mr. Cruel was also very careful. He planned out his home invasions and his exits. He also bathed 2 of his victims before releasing them. The police think that Mr. Cruel is still alive, and it is quite possible that he may have committed other assaults and even other murders. The police have interviewed over 27,000 people for the investigation, and they have 36 suspects that they haven't been able to eliminate, but unfortunately, they are no closer to solving the case than that. Thanks for watching this week's video. If you found it interesting, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. We post a new video every Sunday. Of course, thanks to everyone who already does subscribe. Please also give us a like on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. We may even follow you back. If you want to check out another creepy crime video, please click on one of the videos on the screen now. But that's all for this week. Thanks for watching.